welcome back. My name is Addie of Well Loved Clothing, and today we're doing something so thrifty and fun. We are going to be doing some more thrift flips. So thrift flips are when I take thrifted pieces, whether they're sheets or fabric or shirts, dresses, anything that I'm inspired by basically, and turn it into something wearable and so very cute. But today, this is kind of a part 2 to the thrift flip that I did a couple of weeks ago, where I flipped some pieces for my son. So Peter and I have just been getting rid of a lot of clothes, or at least putting them into donation bags or into my thrift flip pile. And so I am taking a bunch more of those pieces today, and I am updating them, changing them around, making some sets, some pants, some onesies, whatever I'm inspired to make, and turning them into clothes for my son that is here now and my future son who is coming very soon. So tossing it back to when I did all the intros for those pieces, and we're just going to do a little part 2 of Thrift Flip Baby Edition. So let's just jump into it. This is our next piece that we're going to be flipping. It is going to be a John, jumper, romper, whatever you want to call it. Just a baby onesie that you layer like a t-shirt or another piece under. Or my favorite thing is just a John with sneakers and no shirt for a little boy, especially when it gets so hot in the southern summers. I think it's going to be such a perfect piece for him. So this is the inspo, very specific to the striped fabric. I love the subtle patterns on some of these, and of course the bold patterns too. And I'm thinking I might actually paint a little something onto it, or like stamp something onto it in the future. I don't know if I'll do that today, but this is the fabric that I am using. These are a pair of maternity pants that I actually thrifted last pregnancy for Shepherd, so kind of full circle to be like, yeah, I wore these when I was pregnant with you, and now it's a little onesie for you. But I love the bold stripe on this. The fabric is so soft, and I think it's a linen. Oh, it's cotton, so still really good breathable fabric, lightweight, really comfy, and will be so perfect to just throw on for easy outfits that still look really cute for him. And a really great unisex piece too. All of these are honestly really great unisex pieces that I will put on all of my children for all of however many are to come. But let's get into this template.
So for this jumpsuit, I am going to use a pattern. Once again, I'm still just not super comfortable with baby clothing shapes and stuff. So this is the pattern that we're using. I think it was like $8. I got it off of Etsy. I will link it below, but it was just the downloadable PDF pattern. And this one just had the look I wanted. So once all those paper pieces were taped and cut out, I laid out my pants to make sure we had enough fabric in the right places to make this jumpsuit work. One thing of note too, with a bold striped pattern, I want to make sure that my stripes are facing the same way and they're not like one going a little to the left or right. I wanted these to be very straight down the front, which meant that I was going to angle my pattern to match the parallel edges of this pant. Thankfully, I had plenty of fabric to work with here, but I did take the pants apart because the front piece and the back pieces for this jumpsuit are different, so I couldn't just double the fronts and backs. So once my pants were taken apart, I laid one leg of the pant face to face with the other leg of the pant to make sure I had two right sides of fabric once I cut out my jumpsuit. I then laid my jumpsuit pattern on top of that, making sure to get my stripes laid out how I wanted them to be, and use books to weigh down the pattern so I could cut out around the piece. This pattern also has seam allowance already in it, so I didn't have to cut an extra 1/4 of an inch outside of the pattern. Once those were cut, I repeated the same process to cut out the back. And though this pattern did call for a folded edge for the back piece, so it's just one big piece that you cut out, since I was using 2 separate legs of pants, I couldn't do that. So I just added a little seam allowance to the center to connect those back pieces together and still have the right shape. So here are the 2 back pieces that will become one in just a minute, but I first had to cut out all the little extra pieces. So there was a crotch addition in this for some extra wiggle room, a bias cut piece of binding, and 2 pieces for the armholes. Now that everything is cut out, we can start to build our little jumpsuit. So I'm starting by doing that straight seam down the back of this jumpsuit. It's just easy pickings, we'll start there. So I am laying those 2 pieces face to face and just pinning a 1/4 inch away from the edge, which is going to be my seam allowance. I'm then doing a straight stitch to attach those together and doing a zigzag stitch to finish the edge. Here you can see those 2 stitches next to each other and how beautifully that center stripe turned out, which is the whole point of paying so much attention to how we're doing those stripes. So I am ironing that seam flat, and then I am moving on to my front piece. So the front piece has a button placket where I'm going to put snaps in a minute, but first we have to make the button placket. So if this is my front piece, I am facing it inside up because we're going to fold into the garment, and I'm measuring out a 1/2 inch and folding that towards the outside of the garment. I'm ironing that flat to make sure it stays put, foot, and then folding an inch towards the outside of the garment, ironing that flat, and then stitching the inside edge of that down. I then repeat the same process on the other side to form the other side of the button placket. So you can see here, the inside edge is now double folded and sewn down and makes such a great base for those snaps we're going to add. So now we need to attach all of our pieces together. So I'm starting by pinning my button plackets over each other because I know that those need to land on top of each other in the final garment. And this just helps me to see it as like a whole piece, instead of the two separates where they might potentially get misplaced once we attach the crotch together. So after pinning that together and leaving it face up, I am putting my back piece face down so that the front and back are right sides together and pinning the shoulders together. Once those were pinned, I did a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch to attach my front and back pieces. So you can see here what those stitches look like, and I'm ironing those flat also facing backwards. So now we are going to do our bias binding for the neckline of this jumpsuit. So I forgot to film this part because it gets a little intricate for a second. So back to our graphics. I just used a piece of some white lining fabric that I had because I didn't have a long enough piece of the striped fabric to cut on the bias. So to cut on the bias, we are finding the grain of our fabric. Then once we find that, we're going to find the bias of our fabric, which is a 45-degree angle against the bias. So with that, we can cut out the binding strip, which is 13 inches by 2 inches. And then with that little rectangular piece, we are going to pin that to the neckline of the jumpsuit. And it is a little wonky to pin these, but just make sure your edges are straight, and then do a straight stitch all the way around the neckline to attach our facing. Here you can see what that looks like once it's attached, and so we are going to iron that seam flat now, and then fold over 1/4 of an inch from the edge of that binding piece. We're also ironing that flat, and we're going to fold it again, but this time we're folding it at the seam of the facing to the jumpsuit, and we're going to iron that also. We're tucking in those little edges, also ironing those down because that's going to give it such a nice little finish, pinning that facing piece to the front of the jumpsuit and stitching that closed to make a really nice little neckline. Seen here after all the stitching is done. So we can now attach our two pieces of jumpsuit together. So I am flipping my shoulders so that the piece is inside out with face-to-face fabric, and I'm lining up the outside edges of this jumpsuit and pinning down the sides. Taking that to my machine, doing a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch, and this thing is really coming together. I'm definitely intimidated by the little crotch piece that we're going to add in a minute, so I'm just going to do the armholes because that feels kind of easy and it's similar to the neckline binding. So for this pattern, there were 2 pieces that I needed 4 of total for the armhole drop shape. So I already cut those out and sewed those together, and we are now going to attach them. So I am laying them face to face with my armhole drop, making sure to line up the side seam and the shoulder seam. Once those are lined up, I'm pinning all the way around the armhole, repeating the same process on the other side, and then stitching all the way around the armhole also. It's then just a little bit different than the neckline binding because I like to fold the big seam first and then do my 1/4 inch seam. So I'm folding the armhole binding into the jumpsuit so it lays correctly on the inside, and ironing that seam flat, and then going back and doing my 1/4 inch fold, ironing that also, pinning it in place, stitching it around, and the armhole is now done. And you can see here how lovely that binding is. So now all that's left is doing the little crotch piece, which is kind of reminding me of the zigzags on the jeans that I did last time because we're trying to fit a curved shape into another curved shape that is not exactly the same bend, I guess. So I'm matching up the center of the back of the pants to the center of the little crotch insert. I'm pinning that in place because it's very important to keep that exactly where it needs to go. And then I just went ahead and pinned the rest of the back side of the pants to the rest of the little crotch insert because it's just going to be easier to do one long stitch on the front piece once I get all of this in place. And then I realized it might be better to center on the front first because then if I mess something up, it can be on the back. So I guess I switched to attach it to the front side first because this is now attached to the front side. So same process, but I just did it with the front side and made sure that those 2 button plackets were overlapping as I attached that crotch piece. So now we're going to attach it to the back the same way, matching up the 2 centers of the back panel of the jumpsuit and the side of the crotch insert, pinning that together to make sure it stays centered, and then pinning down the outside of the the crotch insert. I did go ahead and stitch this to keep it in place and then took it back to pin the rest of the legs down, just so I didn't have any weird buckling from attaching the crotch insert and the legs of the pants. So once the inside of the leg was pinned, I took it to my machine. I did a straight stitch from the point of the crotch insert down to the leg, and then zigzag stitched all of my raw edges on the inside of this jumpsuit. So back to something simple, we're going to hem this jumpsuit. So I folded them in half to make sure they were the same length and cut off about an inch from the bottom, because that's just the hem length that I wanted and how much fabric was off kilter from one side of the jumpsuit. And then I folded up 1/4 of an inch and then 1/2 inch, ironed that flat, pinned it, and stitched all the way around the leg hole to do a simple hem. And we're almost done. Now all that's left is adding snaps, and this is just the easiest way to get in and out of baby clothes for me. I love a jumpsuit with a snap, and I think it'll add a really cute touch to the front of this jumpsuit to give it just a little visual interest. So I am using some bronzy snaps that I just got from Hobby Lobby. I could probably thrift these, but I was on a time crunch, so I just grabbed some snaps. I also have my snap pliers, which make these super easy to apply. But before I put any snaps anywhere, I need to make sure that they're going to be spaced properly. So here's some very rudimentary planning that I do while I'm putting snaps onto things. So I have 14.5 inches of space to work with. That really means about 14 inches of space because my first snap needs to be 1/2 inch below the top of the neckline. I then want to leave an inch of space at the bottom of the snaps just because I like the visual spacing of that. So the amount of working space that I actually have between first snap and bottom snap is going to be 13 inches. I want to put 5 snaps on here. And so this is where sewing math just kind of comes in. If I have 5 snaps, there's actually 4 spaces between each snap. And so I want the 13 inches to be divided among 4 spaces evenly. So 13 divided by 4 is 3.25, and that is the spacing of the center of our snaps. So I'm then placing those to make sure I like how it looks, and then marking with my Sharpie the center of where that snap is going to be. I'm then matching up the inside piece to make sure the front piece and the back piece of my snap matches. And then I'm seam ripping a little hole because that just makes it easier for these snaps to go through this fabric. Once all of my planning is in place, I can then apply the snaps, which is so very easy. So I take my snap pliers and I put the dome part in the dome part side and the back in the other side and blah, blah, blah. There are so many tutorials on how to do this. I will link one below. And once all the snaps were applied, this jumpsuit is done.
This turned out better than I could have possibly imagined, and I love this pattern. It is just the perfect loose, comfy, easy summer shape for a little romper, and I love the wide stripe on it. I have been all about geometric kind of patterns, but specifically stripes recently I feel like have made this big, like trendy kind of appearance, and I just love it. I think it's such a fun pattern. I especially love the snaps on here. I went with a bigger kind of bronzy snap, and I love just the little detail that it adds. It's just like one more kind of texture to it. They're super lightweight, really easy to get in and out of also. And funny enough, my favorite part of this is the little like added crotch piece, because for diaper butts and for just ease of wearing, I don't have to worry about him like ripping it or anything, because there's just some of that extra room there, and it makes it more comfy for him also. Everything about this just turned out so perfect, and I'm so happy with it. So let's keep going. The next piece that we're doing today is one that I very specifically thrifted a shirt for. It's nothing crazy as far as like concept, but this is what we're going for. Just a really fun patterned little set. I haven't decided whether I want to do a collared shirt or not, and I love that this is a matching set and the bold fabric on it. Matching sets are my favorite to wear. They're my favorite to put shepherd into, and so we're gonna make our own. This is the first time that I'll be making a baby shirt. And so I'm a little intimidated by it, especially because I don't even like making button-up shirts for myself. But this is the fabric that we are using today. I thrifted this shirt specifically for this project. I'm now thinking we might not even have enough fabric for it to do, We probably will. If I do shorts, maybe. But we will probably be using every little bit of this fabric. So I just love the 90s vibes. I love the bold pattern. I love the funkiness of it. I love that you could throw this pattern on with a simple white tee and it would be the cutest little outfit, like little black sneaker, maybe a little colored sock popping out of it. I love getting dressed. I love dressing babies. So this is going to be quite an adventure for me to sew. The top is going to be interesting. So let's flip this shirt.
For this set, we are going to be using a pattern once again. I'm using the same pattern that I used for the pants in the last part of my baby thrift flip videos, but I'm actually going to be using the shirt of this one too. So I decided on a tank top. I love the big pocket. It snaps in the back. I think it's going to be so cute, but we are going to shorten the pants. So I'm also using some shorts that Shepherd already has that fit him really well as a little bit of a pattern for the length and just overall shape. So I'm turning those inside out because the pieces just lay flatter when you do that, and laying it against the pattern just to make sure that the shorts that I make will lay similarly to the shorts that already fit him. And it's looking good so far. So for the length measurement, I'm going to cut my pattern about 1.5 inches longer, which is just the size 68 marker on this pattern, just to give myself enough hem room because I'm not sure exactly how long I want to make these yet. Like I said, we are going to have to kind of finesse how this pattern fits on this shirt. So I spent a substantial amount of time, probably 15 minutes, trying to figure out how I was going to lay this out to get the length that I wanted on the shorts and the shape that I wanted on the shirt. I will end up having to add a little bit extra to the back shoulder piece, but I think it'll hide really well in the pattern, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So once I figure out the way that I can lay these out on this pattern, I'm just cutting out all my pattern pieces. I'm using scissors to cut this front piece because I don't want to take apart the shirt yet and potentially waste some extra hem space that I might need. So I'm weighing my pattern down with a book and then just cutting around the front shorts piece, copying the same thing on the other side of the top of the shirt, using the cutout shorts piece as the pattern to make sure it has all the same little nuances since I'm overlapping some of the yoke where it's double lined on the men's shirt. I marked my front short pieces with a pin and then can move on to the back pieces. I am using the yoke at the top of the back also because I needed the fabric, and I think it might be a cute detail to have a pointed yoke at the top of the back of the shorts. So I'm folding the shirt in half to make sure that those match, lining up the yoke seam, and then using my rotary tool, since I am cutting 2 pieces out at once, to cut out the back of these shorts. I then kept the original shirt folded because I'm going to cut the top pieces now. For these pieces, I had to lay them out pretty specifically because the front piece is meant to be one whole piece. I have a half of it, but it's meant to be cut on the fold so that it's one whole piece across the front. And thankfully, I had just enough fabric at the bottom of the back of the original shirt. You can see how perfectly that fit here on that pattern. But for the back piece, it did need to be 2 separate pieces since they're going to snap together. And I will have to add a little piece to the top of the strap on the back. But before doing that, I am cutting out all of my top pieces. So now to piecemeal our back addition, I am taking a piece of extra paper from my other pants project and taking my tank top back pattern and tracing the top strap of that, and then matching up the piece that I already have cut with that tracing, and then marking about 1/4 inch below where I actually need the piece to connect. That gives me a little bit of seam allowance once I cut this piece. So I cut out that little nugget, remarked my little spots where my stitches are going to go, and then using some excess fabric that I had from the back of this shirt, I folded that in half so that my 2 strap pieces would be the opposite sides of these straps, and cut that out. Before moving on to attaching those little tank top pieces, I cut out the rest of the pattern, which included a pocket that I cut from one of the sleeves that I detached from the shirt. I'm so excited that there was just enough fabric for every piece that we needed, but this is a lined top, so I just used some cotton lining that I had on hand and cut out all the pattern pieces for the main structure of my top. Once my lining and my outers were cut out, then I could start assembling. So we are going to start by attaching those little tank top straps to the top of our back pieces. But another little thing I had to do before this, because of where I cut this back piece, I needed to remove the buttons that were on the original shirt. This is one of my favorite things about thrift flipping, is that in using the fabric that you have might have to remove some stuff or change some stuff around. So I'm just finding creative ways to hide some of the remaking of things. So with the buttons removed, I'm taking those little shoulder strap pieces and pinning them face to face with my tank top It was important to make sure that they were going to lay the right way because the curves don't look like they match up correctly. Once I had those placed and pinned, I took it to my machine and just did a straight stitch, but I did not zigzag stitch the edge because it's going to be inside the lining of this tank top. Here you can see what that looks like once it's attached, and we are ready to start building our shirt. So I am laying the front piece and the back pieces of this top face to face and then pinning the shoulders. The two back pieces are supposed to overlap because that's where we're going to apply our snaps. Once those are pinned on the outer shell of this top, I am then repeating the same process for the lining. And you can see here what I mean by the overlap where the snaps are going to go. And once those are all pinned, I am doing just a straight stitch across the shoulder of both pieces. I'm then ironing that flat with my seam allowance pointed backwards and ironing the little tank top pieces that I added to the outside of this shirt to keep those nice and crisp too. I also ironed the shoulder seams of the lining, and we can now start attaching our top. So I've never made a top this way, so it was very interesting to kind of be like a seamless look to it. So I started by laying my whole outer shell flat face up and then laying my lining on top of that outer shell face down so that they're right sides together. I then matched up my shoulder seams to make sure they would hit in the exact same spot in the lining and the outer shell, and then pinned around the armholes, up the split back on one side, around the neckline, and then down the other side of the split back. Once those were pinned, I stitched all of those together. Once those stitches are done, this is the semi-attached piece that we have. So I'm going to clip the edges of any sharp corners to make them easier to unfold and be square once they're pulled out on the other side, and then snip around any curves, making sure to not catch my seam because that's also going to add mobility and make sure that our curves lay flat once they're folded right side out. I'm snipping around the neckline and also around the armholes, and then flipping this shirt right side out and ironing all of those seams folded over so that we are getting a feel for what our top is going to look like. So this is where it gets a little interesting, is creating the kind of seamless bottom on this. So we're probably going to use some graphics here. But first I am marking a little notch where the pattern says I need to pin for this next part on the back and front pieces. I found this easiest to do laying flat one side at a time. So I folded up the front part of my outer shell, leaving the lining where it is, and folded up the back part of my shell, also leaving the back lining where it is, and marked where those notches were that I just cut. I then pinned 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the fabric for my seam allowance, and repeated the same process on the other side of the top, folding the inside of the top open, making sure that my shoulder seams lined up, and pinning those two pieces face to face. I then took it to my machine and did a straight stitch, and this is what we end up with. I hope that kind of helps. It's a little confusing. So now all that's left to do for the sewing portion is to close in the bottom of this top. So I am opening both sides of the top and folding up the bottom half of the lining to be above where the straps are. I'm then flipping it over and folding up the bottom half of the outer shell to match up with that lining. This looks a little wonky and looks like it might get stuck, but I promise it's gonna work out, mainly because that's what the directions told me. So making sure not to catch any of the top part in this bottom seam, I am pinning from one side of the top all the way across to the other, making sure to match up those little curved seams in the middle that we just sewed with our side seams, and also leaving about a 3-inch space that we're going to pull the top back through once we sew this together. So once I've pinned that, back to the sewing machine and stitching all of that closed, and then pulling the top back through my little 3-inch space that I left. I wasn't thinking when I made this, I was thinking more like vest than top that closes in the back. So I did put my little opening that we're going to close in just a second at the front instead of the back. So if I redid this, I would do a back opening instead, but it'll still be pretty hidden, so I'm not worried about it. So once I pull the whole shirt back through that opening, I'm using one of my pins to pull out the corners to make sure that they're nice and square. I'm ironing all those edges flat to make sure this looks nice and crisp and make sure I get that final seam in. And then I'm closing up that little 3-inch hole that we left. And this is the basic structure of our top. I am loving it. Let's add snaps. For this top, I wanted to use smaller snaps, and so I have a different pair of snap pliers and some 3/8 inch snaps. So I'm doing the same thing I did earlier, where I'm measuring how much space that I have to figure out where I want my snaps to go. This top was a little different though, because I wasn't trying to evenly fit them into a space, because I knew I wanted to leave a few inches at the bottom with no snaps. So for this, I just started 1/4 inch from the top where my first snap was going to go, and then measured and marked 2 inches below that snap for the center of my next snap. I continued to do this until I had 5 snaps marked on the back and was happy with where they would be placed. So then I could start applying my snaps. Once again, there's a video in the description box below for exactly how to do this. And this was a little harder because the fabric was really thick and the snaps were really small, so I may have to change these later, but for now they work wonderfully. And I really liked the silver look against this pattern. So once those were all applied, this is what the back of our shirt looked like with those snaps down the center. So last step for this top is putting that cute big pocket on the front. So I take the piece of pocket that I cut out, and I'm not going to line this, but I'm ironing it to get it nice and flat and flipping it face down and folding the top edge an inch down and then stitching that to the face of the pocket. That's going to give the top of the pocket a really nice finish like this. And then I'm folding all the other edges of the pocket in about 1/4 of an inch and ironing those flat, and then pinning it to the front of my shirt right in the center and stitching that all together, which finishes our top with this adorable big pocket on the front, which means we can move on to the shorts. The shorts are the same pattern that I made the pairs of pants from in my last thrift flip part 1 baby flips video. So I might go a little quickly, but this is a really easy little pattern to follow. So all our pieces are already cut out. I'm not going to line the shorts just because the fabric is thick enough and not see-through. So I'm putting my left and right 2 front pieces together face to face and then pinning up the center crotch. I'm doing the same thing with my 2 back pieces, putting them face to face, pinning up the crotch, and then stitching up both of those crotches for the front and back of my pants. I also zigzag stitch those edges to finish off the inside of these pants since they won't be lined. So this is my front piece and my back piece both sewn together, and I am ironing that center seam as flat as possible and then laying the back piece of these shorts face up and the front piece of these shorts face down on that back piece and pinning up the sides and center of these shorts. The back is a little bit wider than the front of these shorts just because that's how patterns work. The back of your pants is usually going to be bigger than the front, especially to accommodate for a little diaper butt. So I am matching up the edges of my shorts and pinning up one side, up the other side, and around the center crotch. I'm then taking that to my sewing machine and stitching those together, again doing my zigzag stitch on the edge. And this is the basic structure of our shorts. I'm going to iron those seams flat also, and then we can move on to hemming the shorts. To hem these, I'm just doing a double folded hem. So I fold up about 1/4 of an inch, fold up another 1/4 of an inch, ironing both of those flat, pinning around the leg hole, and then doing a straight stitch to hold that in place. So here is the hem of the shorts, and then we're doing essentially the same thing to make an elastic casing at the waistband. So I'm folding 1/4 of an inch down, and I have an inch thick elastic, so I'm going to make an inch wide casing. So I'm folding an inch down from there, ironing as I go, and then pinning around that waistband, leaving about a 2-inch space for my elastic to go through, stitch that closed, and then I use the safety pin to attach to the end of my elastic so I can scrunch it through the waistband while also getting the best toddler snuggles in the world. And once it comes out the other side, I attach the elastic together so that little opening in my waistband down, and these shorts are done, which means this set is done.
These are some of my new favorite patterns. I do think I will modify a couple of things. Well, actually, I messed up something on the back of this because I just cut it a little bit too short. So I'm really glad that it fits him right now. I wonder how long the neck will hold out though, because it is just like a little skinnier. But oh my gosh, the pattern of this, the mix of the tank top and the shorts, I am just so in love with it. But my favorite little detail that I think is so cute and just kind of worked out this way is that the shirt pocket is now on the front of the shorts. So it has this really adorable pocket, which I think lends itself so well to the pocket on the front of the shirt, especially because they're like little rounded pockets. Just those fun tiny details make me so happy, especially for baby clothes. I just feel like adding some whimsy to it is just the cutest thing you can do. They're just comfy, lightweight, the little 90s pattern. So cute. I could also see him wearing this like unsnapped as a little vest over the front. I am so glad that you guys joined me to make these adorable pieces today. Thank you so much for thrift flipping with me and for doing a little part 2 of some baby thrift flips specifically. I hope that this inspires you to just get creative and make something out of something else and just experiment. Because I am gonna have to fix a couple things, but we experimented and it was so much fun. So I will see you next time. You are well loved. Bye.